Welcome everybody to Business Insights on Monday, the 27th of July, 2020. So Business Insights is a very exciting webinar series hosted weekly on Mondays at midday by a panel of industry thought leaders for business owners who simply want to be in the know about the latest and most significant news and initiatives in the Australian business landscape. Our panel of advisors aim to inform, educate and provide strategic insights to the changes in the economic, legislative and financial landscape that affect small business. We aim to guide our viewers and navigate them through the challenges that they're going to face throughout COVID-19 and beyond. Let's now meet our panel of industry thought leaders. First up, I'd like to welcome Adam Lysle from O'Brien Palmer.
How are you going, Ian? I'm having some technical issues, but thank you very much for having me.
That's okay, no problem. Next up, we've got Liza Garrido from Enigma HR. Liza, welcome.
Oh, good morning from Brisbane, Queensland.
Next up, we've got Sam Gareshi from MoneyClip Private Wealth. Sam, thanks very much for being here today.
Thanks for having me on.
We've got Rob Skeen from Skeen Property Buyers Agents. Rob, thank you very much for coming.
G'day Ian, hi viewers, thanks for having me.
And my name's Ian Maclachlan and I'm from Imperium Accounting and Tax. Now guys, I'm going to start off this week because there's a fair bit that I want to cover off with JobKeeper 2.0, okay? So last Tuesday, the government announced that due to the ongoing COVID-19 crisis, the JobKeeper payment current scheme will be extended by 6 months until the 28th of March 2021. So the period of the extended scheme, so we're going to break them down. We've got the current scheme and now we've got the new scheme, which is referred to as the extended scheme. This comprises 13 fortnights. So the proposed extension basically doubles the length of the original scheme. So what are the major differences between the current and the extended scheme? There's probably three major differences. The first is that it's a two-tier payment rate. So we've got the full and partial rate, and I'm going to go into the details of these in just a minute. Then we've got the current $1,500 per fortnight rate will be reduced on the 28th of September 2020 and reduced further on the 4th of January 2021. And also the declining turnover test will be retested on a quarterly basis. So let's look at some of these changes in more detail now. So if we look at the payment rate, so the payment rate is going to be reduced in two tranches as follows. So we've got from the 28th of September 2020 to the 3rd of January 2020. Now there's two rates. There's a full rate and a partial rate. Let's just look at the full rate for the moment. So for that period, the full rate is going to reduce from $1,500 a fortnight to $1,200 a fortnight. Then from the 4th of January 2020 to 28th of March 2021, it's going to reduce from $1,200 a fortnight to $1,000 per fortnight. Now that's the full rate, okay? So we probably want to now look at what is the partial rate. So for that first period where it's reducing to $1,200 a fortnight, that's the full rate. The new term that they've got is the partial rate, and that's going to be for $750 a fortnight. And from the 4th of January 2021 to the 28th of March 2021, the partial rate will drop from $750 a fortnight to $650 a fortnight. So let's now look at what full and partial rates mean. So it's basically a two-tier payment system, and it's going to be applied to workers based on their weekly average hours worked in February 2020. So to be eligible for the full rate, in the 4 weeks of pay periods before the 1st of March 2020, the worker must have worked in the business for 20 hours or more on average per week. To be eligible for the partial rate, the worker must have worked in the business for less than 20 hours per week on average. So what are the implications of this? Well, under the current scheme, the requirement for an employee to be employed on the 1st of March 2020 and for a business participant to have been actively engaged in the business on the 1st of March 2020 does not include or did not include a minimum number of hours on the employment or active engagement of employment. So basically, employees whose work hours decreased from at least 20 hours per week to less than 20 hours per week after February 2020 due to the COVID-19 crisis, including those who were stood down, will still remain entitled to full payment rate regardless of the hours they actually work in a fortnight from the 28th of September 2020. So the next thing that we want to look at is, and I'll just say here, look, there is a lot to cover and a lot to go off here. So today on Business Insights, we're giving a brief overview. If you want more detailed workings on this and how it's going to work for your business, please do reach out. So let's now look at the proposed new decline in turnover test. So from Monday, the 28th of September 2020 until Sunday, the 3rd of January 2020, where we've got the full rate of $1,200 a fortnight and the partial rate of $750 a fortnight, businesses are going to have to compare actual GST turnover in the 2020 June quarter and September 2020 quarters to their comparative periods in the 2019 period. And the percentages remain the same. So basically, for most businesses, it's going to be the 30% decline. For not-for-profits, it's the 15% decline in turnover. And for businesses with a turnover of more than $1 billion, it's a 50% decline in turnover. Then in the second part, so from the 4th of January 2021 until the 28th of March 2021, businesses are going to have to compare their actual turnover in the June, September, and December 2020 quarters to their actual turnovers in the June 2019, September 2019, and December 2019 quarters. So there is a fair bit there involved. And Liza, I was just wondering from an HR perspective, what's involved here? What else needs to come into play from your point of view?
Thanks, Ian. Look, it's very interesting because a lot of businesses around March, when the JobKeeper announcements were made, have already started planning, or at the very least, if you were quite proactive and smart about your workforce planning, most businesses would have planned their workforce up until September. Come around May to June, businesses have been planning post-September, and this announcement is crystallizing what those plans are. So the impact really, as you already indicated, is that if you are not seeking advice on the application of these payments to all the individuals in your business that you've either stood down or have been providing JobKeeper top-up payments, you once again need to seek advice on the new regime. As you plan your workforce from September onwards, knowing that you have this subsidy until January, you need to be very mindful of HR compliance, and that is absolute key. I've been talking about this in the last few weeks. You still need to make sure that if you're making decisions about changing one's position description, that those position descriptions are not changed dramatically and without consultation. And if you are changing one's tasks and accountabilities, you must pay in accordance to the task and responsibility and not pay a reduced rate for, if you like, a more complicated or complex responsibility. So you still need to comply with everything to do with the modern award or your enterprise bargaining arrangement. Also, you still need to ensure that you are following the flexible work arrangements that are in line with legislation. So there is no contravention at all, regardless of the changes and upcoming changes in wages or if you like, in the JobKeeper subsidies. There is no shortcutting. So a lot of the organizations now will be looking at making very tough decisions on the employees that they've stood down, and they may have organized the stand down or scheduled the stand down until September. So they'll be making decisions as to whether or not those stand downs will continue and when they would stop, or whether in fact they will lay off or make staff members redundant. So my advice to that is to make sure that you are still compliant with the whole redundancy process, and primarily make sure that it is a genuine redundancy. It is not a redundancy disguised as a performance management process, but make sure that you seek advice on how to implement this redundancy. So HR leaders at the moment are busier more than ever with regards to change management and compliance, as businesses are really challenged with absorbing the responsibility of managing costs right now. So I've talked about legislation. I've talked about, in the past, I've talked about legislation on underpayment of wages and entitlement and the impact on businesses against that. I've talked about legislation against breaches on workplace health and safety, or contravening redundancy procedures, and the fines imposed on corporates and small businesses. But today I really want to focus on looking at revisiting your COVID safe plan and your COVID safe return to work plan in light with what's happening in Victoria and of course the increased risk in New South Wales. So make sure that your return to work readiness is reviewed, and your communication plan on any changes at the moment with your teams remotely or your teams on site is reassuring them that you are firstly prioritizing the workplace health and safety and their mental health as well. So more and more insurance underwriters are moving away from underwriting, if you like, any risks that have to do with COVID-19. So because you can't just get an insurance policy to cover your risk as such, just make sure as businesses that you review whatever you already have in place and make sure it's updated. So this constant review is necessary because changes happen from week to week in Victoria and New South Wales, for instance. So look at how many of your staff members are taking public transport. If they are they compliant with wearing the masks, for instance? Look at the sign-on sheets that you have if you are inviting guests or visitors in the workplace. Do you want to make policies about not having any incoming guests and visitors, for instance, with increased risk? How about your return to work challenges, or I'm sorry, working from home challenges rather? A lot of IT providers are busier than ever making sure that the remote work setup is permanent, and so therefore, you know, the seat arrangement, the ergonomic height, the positioning of the monitors and the computers, are these now all semi-permanent? Because this is going to be ongoing for quite some time. So continue to review that and address that. Look at more than ever being vigilant with your internal communication protocols. Use digital and data platforms to measure productivity and output rather than the bandying the clock in terms of what time do we work, 8:30 to 5:30. So look at managing output rather than managing time, because there are no more boundaries when we work from home as to when you stop and start. So start measuring on productivity and output rather than just time, for instance. If your business is going to continue to survive and then thrive, the future is all about adaptability, flexibility, and portability. So have a look at your workforce plan, the way that your employees are working, and see whether they are adaptable, that they're flexible, and they can be portable. And that's really what I wanted to emphasize this week, because the changes in the JobKeeper payments will have a flow-on effect to other changes in the way that we operate, because clearly this is going to be here to stay for quite some time. So that's all for me, and I'm happy to provide some input as the rest of us discuss their ongoing topics in the course of this webinar.
Thanks very much, Liza. Some fantastic insight there. One of the interesting things that I find about the extended scheme is that businesses are no longer going to be able to test for eligibility using projected turnover. So they were able to do that before, or they cannot now choose a calendar month as their test period. So it's got to be on actual, and it's got to be on a quarterly basis as well. So the government is really tightening it up there.
Yeah, and that's
But
and
I just
Ian,
want
sorry to interrupt, Ian, and that's the reason why I said earlier that businesses are now really strictly planning the workforce, because still the biggest expense in a lot of businesses is the payroll, right? And so they're going to be making some tough decisions now on who's to stay and who's to go, and obviously try and look at all of the right competencies in the business that they need to stay in the business.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We might go to Sam Goreshi now from MoneyClip Private Wealth. Sam, what effect has any of this had on the banks and the interest rates?
So from an interest rate perspective, I guess the banks themselves have been pretty quiet for the week. But the biggest news that we've had is that the government is going to issue 30-year bonds, which they haven't done for a very long time. And this is to obviously cope with the debt that is being accumulated because of these payments. Saw the Treasurer talk about that on the weekend. Obviously JobKeeper is costing about $11 billion a month, and so it's building quite a bit as you go. So I think from a bank's perspective, we may see some longer dated fixed rates come out, which are going to be competitive. So I guess we'll wait and see what happens from that perspective. I would say though, always be mindful when you have a fixed rate loan, because if you ever have to break a fixed rate loan, the cost to breaking can be punitive, and you need to understand the impact before you go down that path in particular. I've been asked in the past, can I pay off a fixed rate loan quicker? The reality is that yes, you can, but each bank has their own requirements as to how much quicker you can pay it off, as in how much extra you can put in any particular period of fixed rate. So I suggest you liaise with your bank or your credit provider or your broker. We only give that advice to our clients when they ask, because very few flexible products in relation to the fixed rates actually exist. And of course, JobKeeper and JobSeeker is continuing because there is a need for it, and that means that people are experiencing financial pressure. And obviously, when it comes to loans in particular, I would really suggest that you act early rather than later. Definitely don't wait until you're in trouble to act. This allows you to understand your options better. You know how you can actually deal with whatever that's coming your way, and in some shape or form ensures that you have the least amount of impact on you from a credit rating perspective as well, which is obviously very important nowadays when you want to get a loan of any kind. And of course, you don't want to have your future held to ransom because of whatever's happening right now. And so overall, I guess what we're going to see is much more debt from a government's perspective. The rates are still reasonably low. There seems to be some small amount of competition in the variable rate loans right now, but they're very small tweaks. There's nothing big, and that's the update from the interest rate perspective. Yeah.
Thanks very much, Sam. I love listening to you talk, so I might keep you on. And what about the stock market? How's that performed over the last week?
Well, we had a nothing week last week, really. We had a beautiful increase on Tuesday, 2.58%, when the government made their announcements. But really, since then, it started to drift down, and it ended up the week with negative 0.1%. So not much really happened overall. It really does feel like as if we're on that knife's edge still. And, we overreact to good news, and we also overreact to bad news. So, there was some talk about some vaccine being available by the end of the year. Market loved that, and that's why one of the other reasons why the market went up early on Tuesday. Of course, with Victoria being where they are today and overseas as well, India is picking up pace in terms of their COVID cases and so on. And then, market has certainly overreacted. And you can see how there's indiscriminate way that the market really looked at some of these things. For example, last week, in US, Intel, the chip maker, they came out with a reasonably good update. In fact, they beat their guidance. They were still hammered by 16%, which is unbelievable from a tech company at the time. And of course, last week saw US employment rise again, and obviously that's an issue for them. Now, obviously, we have this JobKeeper, JobSeeker, JobSpender. There's all kinds of job things going on. and whatever else that you want to refer to those at this point in time. But obviously there needs to be some medical breakthrough for all these things to go away. But the reality is that the economy needs to be open so that they can build our GDP and basically get us out of this issue that we're in. So currently we've got about $850 billion in government debt, a budget deficit of $184 billion. So it's easy to see that even a 1% interest rate costs between $8 and $10 billion a year just in interest to service. So you can see that, you know, it's going to become very, very hard for us to blast our way through just with debt and you know, JobKeeper and so on. Really, we need to make sure that post this pandemic, you know, businesses can build and that GDP can increase. And I hate to be a bearer of bad news, but I feel that we'll definitely have some increases in taxes post-pandemic. No doubt GST will probably get looked at, and I'm sure there'll be some type of budget repair levy like we had the Queensland floods at some point in the future. Now, all this uncertainty also means that, you know, some people ask about, you know, gold in particular. Gold has rallied about 60% in the last 12 months, which is an amazing outcome. And people normally buy gold for diversifying their risk, making sure that, you know, it holds its value. People buy it where there's political uncertainty and also hedge against inflation. We don't have much inflation at the moment, by the way. And so there are many different ways that you can hold it, from a physical perspective to shares to the actual company and so on. And so the question of should I buy gold now? I guess the answer that I can give you is it depends, and that depends on whether if you feel that you need a hedge against extreme depression as a safe haven. So if you feel that, you know, things are going to get really worse from where they are today, then there is some benefit in holding gold from a value perspective. And of course, if you've got concerns about inflation, so, you know, if you think with all the government debt and value of money is going to go down, and in some shape or form we would have inflation, then that's the reason why you would hold gold as well. So I guess ultimately it depends on your view of the future, and as we know, it's quite hazy at the moment, so it's anyone's guess. And that's the update for this week.
Thanks very much, Sam. Some really fascinating insights there. Whilst we're on the topic of markets, we might get a Rob Skeen from Oasis Skeen Property. Rob, what's happening in the property market, mate?
Thank you. Well, look, the extension of the JobKeeper program has been welcome news to the property industry. A lot of our experts have claimed this program will do more in protecting house prices and industries than the federal government's home builder scheme, which they announced a little while back. ANZ economist David Gradwell said the government's support would stop the property market falling off a cliff. He just went on further to say that basically, you know, giving people that 9-month certainty will go a long way, and it's a lot more broad-based than the home builder scheme. Numbers are up from the previous weekend in terms of homes going under the gavel. We had 546 homes with a clearance rate of 64%. Sellers are taking, I think, the advice of agents and telling them, you know, getting them to go onto the market now, especially as we might possibly go into further restrictions, certainly with what's happening in Victoria. Growing trend in real estate at the moment is something called boomerang homes, which basically means more homes are returning to the market during COVID-19. So there's residential property deals falling over left, right and centre at the moment, and they're being re-advertised amid this COVID-19 uncertainty and financial belt tightening. So data complied by realestate.com.au shows a growing trend in the number of under offer listings being re-advertised, prompting speculation that deals are falling through because of tighter lending restrictions, and also home buyers just simply having cold feet. And I certainly noticed that on Saturday with a lot of the property auctions that I attended. People are very nervous at the moment. You might have 6 or 7 register, but only 2 people actually bid. And are they bidding over market value? No, they're not. In most cases, they're falling just under the reserve, and the negotiations are being done post-auction. So at the moment, it's very, very price sensitive, and buyers are very nervous. High sell price last week was 356 Edgecliff Road, a large Victorian home in Wallara, selling at auction for 8.1 million. And on the opposite end of the scale, the cheapest was a 3-bedroom house in West Hoxton for 605,000. That's all from me this week. Next week, I look forward to talking to you about the 3 pillars of the Australian property market and what's affecting the psyche of that at the moment. And that was a question that came to me last week via Facebook. So I look forward to speaking to you guys about that next week.
Thanks, Rob. Really look forward to it. We might go to Adam Lysle now from O'Brien Palmer. Adam, I was just wondering, what should businesses do to ensure that they've got a COVID-19 survival plan?
Well, that's an interesting phrase, Ian. You know, we've heard about the COVID safe plan. We've heard about the COVID safe return to work plan. Well, I think time is now that people should be really developing a COVID safe business survival plan. Coin it however you like. The reality is, if you don't have one, just hand over the keys. You might as well, because the reality is you're going to become a statistic. There's certainly increased risk of that. You know, the health crisis deservedly has been at the centre of the news cycle for 3 months now. And only as a result of the announcements made by the federal government and the Treasurer last week, the reality of the economic impact of this pandemic is now surging to the top of the news cycle. And we don't seem to be backing away from that. And I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing. I can't think of a business that I've walked into, particularly in the hospitality industry, over the course of the weekend that doesn't have some kind of COVID safe procedure. You need to sign in, you need to register, you need to sanitize, you need to wait, you must be seated. All those things are really good. And you know, even in the office, we've got a return to work plan, and we keep people regularly updated if anyone feels ill and you must not turn up to work. You must go and get a certificate and all those things. But how about taking it to the next level? How about looking beyond the day-to-day operations and working out a business plan, if you like, however you want to coin it, to deal with any eventuality that may come about? And let's talk about a couple of those realities. A second lockdown, another period of restrictions, upgraded restrictions. Imagine just for a moment if your business was directly affected without even knowing that you were symptomatic. Someone walked into your business, happened to be there at a certain particular time, bang, business is shut down, deep clean. How are you going to deal with that? What's your communication strategy with your customers? How does it affect your business? So businesses really need to think about putting together what I've coined as the COVID safe business survival plan. And if you are doing that and you're putting those things in place, that's fantastic. Obviously, we can help with those things as well. But the important thing with those plans is it empowers the business to have in place a predetermined action plan for the current recovery effort, but also what will happen if one of those, you know, dramatic issues take place, like a second wave, like a lockdown, like a direct impact on the business. And you know, we've heard already today on this broadcast about, you know, a vaccine. Well, I hate to break it to you, but it's going to be 6 to 18 months before that vaccine is fully authorised and in place and in production. So we could, like Australia did, go down the road 3 months. Oh yeah, we'll be right. Everyone's fine. We're all holding hands back at the beach. Bang, 6 months from now, another wave hits us. And I hate to be sounding dramatic, but that's the sheer reality of it. And unless businesses are taking this seriously and putting in plans in place, you could actually suffer the consequences. Now, I've often said in the last couple of months, if you can't pay your rent and the arrears on demand, if you can't pay your bank loans and the arrears on demand, if JobKeeper 2.0 stopped tomorrow, remembering that JobKeeper is a discretionary stimulant, could you survive? And this is the other thing that you need to be including in that business survival plan. Recently, 265 highly regarded economists wrote an open letter to the Prime Minister, pleading with him not to sacrifice health outcomes for the sake of the economy. And in this letter, and we're talking about some of the leading economists in this country, in this letter they finished off, the last paragraph was, a second wave outbreak would be extremely damaging to the economy, in addition to involving tragic and unnecessary loss of life. So if there's one little key message undertoning that, please, if you're told to wear a mask, wear a mask. If you need to sanitize, sanitize. Do all the things as if we are in the middle of a lockdown now. Just like we all did, we behaved really well at the peak of the pandemic. We need to not let the foot off the gas with that. And hopefully our health battle, which we're all involved with that in some way, shape or form, will continue on its good work. We can then protect ourselves and each other through that. But then we will prevent a further exacerbation of the pandemic and in turn the economic impact of that. So, you know, I'm all about survival, of course. I'm going to be dealing with enough liquidations and shutdowns in the coming years. But the reality is, if you want to get your business on track and you'll be able to market the fact that you've got a survival plan to all your stakeholders, I don't think that's a bad thing.
Hear, hear.
Thanks very much, Adam. Some really great advice there. Sam, you mentioned gold before. I might just ask you about some other precious commodities out there, such as silver and diamonds. What are your thoughts on those?
Okay, so in terms of, I guess, gold, it's pretty easy. There's 9-carat gold, there's 18-carat gold. It has industrial usage. It's a superconductor. So, and it's also easy to be able to trade it. So there's liquidity behind gold. You know, you can buy a gold company, you can buy the physical easy, and you can find a ready market in terms of working with it. So gold is an easy precious metal to deal with. With things like diamond, I guess they hold their value somewhat, but the reality is that it's a lot more complex than gold because it depends on its cut, it depends on its color, it depends on its clarity, types, where it's come from, and so on. So the rare diamonds definitely increase in value over time, but there are many types of diamonds that actually aren't rare. So they don't necessarily increase in value. And in fact, if you bought some of those and you were to resell them, you're not necessarily going to get their value back because you buy them at retail. And you would always have to sell them back cheaper. And of course, the liquidity which gold has, diamond doesn't necessarily have. So it's harder for you to, for example, be able to sell diamond or, you know, buy diamond 9086 unless you buy a diamond mining company. It's very much more of a one-to-one transaction. And so when you look at some of these things and the complexity of them, even if they do hold their value, the complexity makes it less attractive as an investment. I guess, you know, in my mind anyway, and from what I've read and understood over time.
Thanks very much, Sam. That's really fascinating stuff there. Does anyone else have any questions for anyone on the panel today?
Actually, I just wanted, Ian, I wanted to comment on what Adam just talked about in terms of the COVID-safe business plan, really. And that's what I was talking about earlier, about readdressing the overlooked challenges of remote working. You know, in the first phase of what we've all just gone through, everybody transitioned very quickly and almost overnight to remote working. And now that the organizations and businesses are reviewing the costs of commercial leases, and they are either looking at ensuring that part, if not all of the staff or some teams will be continually working from home. You do really need to address, as part of your COVID-safe business plan, readdressing all of the challenges of remote working. And as I said, this is all linked to workplace health and safety. This is all linked to all of the applicable policies and procedures you should have in place. because if you want the flexibility and adaptability and tenure that I've been talking about here, you really need to start looking at some kind of permanent workforce working from home and making sure that they are set up properly to do this, right through your communication channels, your team communication protocols, whether it's through Slack or Microsoft Teams or Monday or whatever technologies you're going to be using. You all need to start looking at adapting the way that you operate to make sure that you have this COVID-safe business plan in place.
I've got a quick one for Rob, and this might be for next week, and I'm picking up from what Liza just said about the office space and so on. I'd love to get an update on how the office commercial been tracking, say, in Melbourne, New South Sydney, maybe even Brisbane. And yeah, what's the update on that now that we're a few months into the whole COVID and people working from home and so on?
Yeah, happy to do that for you next week, Sam. I have a quick question for you. Where do you hide all your gold bars?
Yeah, just here.
Rob, next week might be good to talk about some commercial fit out organizations, you know, in terms of their experience with Make Good, because there's a big demand now of Make Good work, because the tenants are actually advising their landlords now that they're actually not extending their leases. So a good indicator is the uptake on Make Good work in terms of what's happening in the commercial property area.
And cleaning.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Hey, Ian, I've just had a question pop through, and we definitely don't have time for it today, so I'll take it on notice and come back to the viewers next week. But I've had a question about the amount of debt that the government has incurred with this. How long is it going to take us to pay it back? So I'll come up with some interesting insights about all of that next week. I've spoken this week about 300 years, but let's see what I can come up with for next week and scare the crap out of everyone again.
Yeah, I mean, technically a very, very, very long time.
Oh dear. Ooh, joy, oh joy.
What's going to happen sooner? Is our coal going to run out, or we're going to repay this debt faster? So,
well, you know, one thing that would actually help it in due course is inflation, of course, because you can inflation away the debt over time quicker. So I guess, you know, if in due course there's inflation, that's going to help and reduce the real value of that debt over time. But of course, that has other side effects that's not necessarily great for the economy.
Yeah. Oh, actually, Sam, I had a question for you. When you talked earlier about making sure that you also watch your credit rating. So when individuals have asked for a deferred payment in their mortgages, how does that impact their credit scores?
Yeah, so the banks have said that they won't put a credit default or a late payment on their credit report if they have been approved for a COVID-19 default.
Okay.
Yeah. But if you don't do it, and you haven't asked for the deferral, you just have to put your head in the sand and not make payments, then you will be reported to the credit agency. There's been essentially what they call a delinquent pay.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you to Liza Garrido, Rob Skeen, Sam Goreshi and Adam Lysle. And also thank you to our viewers. Remember to follow us on YouTube and Facebook. And we look forward to seeing you all next Monday for the next episode of Business Insights. Thanks.
And thank you to you, Ian. And thank you to you, Ian. Bye, everybody.
See you later.
See you later.